Welcome back, background historian crew. Tonight we will delve into Hollywood and its controversial history in Los Angeles. Through its rise and fame, to its deep dark secrets, Hollywood is still a prominent force in entertainment today. Sit back and relax as we deconstruct Hollywood's past and discover many secrets. Let's begin. Part 1: The Origins of Cinema. Introduction: Before the stars, before Hollywood. Long before the bright lights of Los Angeles, before red carpets, blockbusters, and billion-dollar franchises, there was simply the magic of movement, the marvel of capturing life on film. The origins of cinema stretch back not to California, but to inventors, tinkerers, and visionaries scattered across Europe and America in the late 19th century. Their work was messy, experimental, and uncertain, but it planted the seeds of what would become the global phenomenon of Hollywood. In this opening chapter, we step into the flickering glow of early projectors, through the Nickelodeons of working-class neighborhoods, and into the imaginations of the inventors who first made moving images possible. The prehistory of motion pictures. Cinema did not emerge overnight. It was the culmination of centuries of fascination with light and motion. Magic lanterns. As early as the 1600s, inventors used lanterns to project painted slides onto walls, creating ghostly spectacles for audiences. Persistence of vision. Scientists discovered that the human eye perceives continuous motion when images are shown in rapid succession, a principle that underpins all film. Optical toys. In the 19th century, devices like the zoetrope and phenakistoscope allowed people to watch spinning images appear to move. These amusements primed audiences for the leap from illusion to recorded reality. The invention of the motion camera. The race to capture real movement began in the late 1800s. Etienne Jules Marie, France created the chronophotographic gun, capturing multiple frames per second. Edward Muybridge, United States famously photographed a galloping horse in 1878, proving all four hooves left the ground. Thomas Edison and William Dixon, U.S. developed the kinetoscope, a peephole device showing short-moving pictures to individual viewers. The Lumiere brothers, France in 1895, Auguste and Louis Lumiere unveiled the cinematograph, capable of recording, developing, and projecting film for audiences. The Lumieres are often credited with giving birth to cinema as we know it, shared, public, and communal. The first screenings. The first film screenings were brief, astonishing spectacles. Workers leaving the factory, 1895. A simple scene of employees exiting a building amazed audiences who had never seen life recorded and replayed. Arrival of a train at La Ciotat station. Legend has it that audiences ducked in fear, believing the train would burst from the screen. Short actualities. Early films depicted simple, everyday activities, feeding a baby, walking, street scenes. Though simple, these films had a profound effect. Moving pictures turned reality into a spectacle. Georges Méliès, cinema as imagination. If the Lumieres gave cinema realism, Georges Méliès gave it magic. The magician filmmaker, Méliès, a stage illusionist, discovered cinema's potential for trickery. Special effects. He pioneered jump cuts, dissolves, and fantastical sets. A Trip to the Moon, 1902. His most famous film, with its iconic image of a rocket striking the men in the moon's eye, turned cinema into fantasy. Méliès showed that film could not only record life but create entire worlds. Nickelodeons and the birth of an industry. By the early 1900s, moving pictures spread rapidly across America. Nickelodeons. Small theaters charging 5 cents became popular in working-class neighborhoods. Short films, programs consisted of a mix of comedies, dramas, newsreels, and variety acts. Accessibility. Unlike opera or stage plays, movies were cheap, democratic, and available to immigrants and the poor. Cinema became the people's entertainment. Edison's trust in the war of patents. As film grew in popularity, battles erupted over control. Motion Picture Patents Company, 1908. Edison and other manufacturers formed a trust to monopolize equipment, film stock, and distribution. Independent producers, filmmakers resisted, moving west to escape Edison's lawyers and expand their freedom. California bound, the long journey across the continent would soon lead to Hollywood's birth. The industry's westward migration was born out of conflict and necessity. Closing reflection. The origins of cinema are a story of invention, imagination, and accessibility. From magic lanterns to the cinematograph, from Melissa's Moon to the humble Nickelodeons, the foundation was laid for an industry that would one day dominate the world. As you rest, picture the flicker of a projector in a darkened hall of 1895 Paris, the astonished gasps of the crowd as a train appears to rush from the screen. That gasp of wonder echoes still in every theater today, an eternal reminder of cinema's first magic. Part 2: The Move West, Why Hollywood? Introduction. From the East Coast to the Golden Coast. The American film industry was not born in California. Its first steps were taken in the industrial cities of the East Coast, New York, New Jersey, and Chicago. Studios there churned out short films for Nickelodeons, and inventors like Thomas Edison dominated with their patents and machinery. Yet within just a few decades, the center of filmmaking shifted thousands of miles westward, to a sleepy little town outside Los Angeles called Hollywood. This chapter explores why filmmakers abandoned the East, why California's environment was irresistible, and how the move west gave rise to the movie capital of the world. Edison's shadow and the trust wars. At the dawn of the 20th century, filmmaking on the East Coast was booming, but tightly controlled. Thomas Edison's monopolies, through the Motion Picture Patents Company, MPPC, Edison and his partners sought to monopolize the industry, controlling cameras, projectors, and film stock. Independent producers, many filmmakers resisted these restrictions, facing lawsuits and harassment from Edison's agents. The search for freedom, independent producers realized they needed distance from Edison's reach to experiment with longer films, new stories, and independent distribution. Hollywood's birth was as much an act of rebellion as it was innovation. California's natural advantages. Why move west? Geography and climate provided the perfect stage. Sunshine. California's near-constant clear skies and mild weather allowed year-round filming, something impossible in New York's harsh winters. Varied landscapes, deserts, mountains, beaches, farmland, and forests, all within a few hours' travel, meant filmmakers could simulate almost any setting. Space, land in and around Los Angeles was cheap, offering vast open areas for studios to build sprawling lots. California was a natural film set waiting to be discovered. Los Angeles, a growing city. At the turn of the century, Los Angeles was a rapidly growing city, but still modest compared to East Coast centers. Population boom, driven by oil discoveries and rail connections, LA offered opportunities for migrants. Infrastructure, the city invested in streetcars, railways, and ports, making it accessible for commerce. Hollywood Village, once a quiet agricultural community, Hollywood was annexed into Los Angeles in 1910, just as filmmakers began arriving. The synergy between a growing city and a growing industry was perfect. The first films in Hollywood. By the 1910s, studios had planted their first roots. Biograph Company sent crews west as early as 1910, filming in Old California, the first movie made in Hollywood. Nestor Studios, founded in 1911, considered the first permanent studio in Hollywood. Others followed. By the mid-1910s, major companies like Universal, Paramount, and Warner Brothers established production centers. Hollywood went from rural farmland to a film colony almost overnight. The star system emerges. With Hollywood's growth came the rise of the movie star. Anonymous beginnings, early actors were rarely credited, but audiences began to recognize and demand favorite performers. Florence Lawrence, one of the first actors promoted by name, creating a template for celebrity culture. The Star Machine, studios realized stars could sell films, and began cultivating screen personas deliberately. Hollywood's move west thus coincided with the birth of stardom. The studio lots and backlots. As studios flourished, Hollywood's landscape changed. Massive studio lots, with room to expand, studios built self-contained worlds, sound stages, editing rooms, offices, and backlots for outdoor sets. Backlots as worlds, entire city streets, medieval castles, or western towns constructed for repeated use. Efficiency, with all stages of production centralized, Hollywood became a factory of stories. These lots became the heartbeat of the movie industry. The influence of immigration and diversity. Hollywood's rise was shaped by a wave of immigrant entrepreneurs. Studio founders, many of the major studios, Warner Brothers, Paramount, MGM, were founded by Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe who sought opportunity outside industries that had excluded them. Creative energy. This diversity gave Hollywood a unique drive, blending ambition with cultural experimentation. Global outlook. Even in its infancy, Hollywood thought beyond America, aiming for worldwide audiences. Hollywood was built by outsiders who found freedom on California soil. The myth of Hollywood is born. By the 1920s, Hollywood was more than a place, it was a symbol. Tourists arrived, curious visitors flocked to see stars, studios, and sets. The Hollywood sign, erected in 1923, originally reading Hollywoodland as a real estate promotion, it became an emblem of cinema's new home. Media buzz, magazines and fan clubs amplified the glamour, embedding Hollywood in the global imagination. What had begun as a practical move to escape Edison's reach became a cultural phenomenon. Closing reflection. The migration west was more than geography, it was destiny. In California, filmmakers found freedom from monopolies, endless sunshine, cheap land, and the chance to invent a new kind of storytelling empire. From those early studios in orchards and farmland, Hollywood grew into a beacon of global culture. As you rest, imagine the dusty streets of early Hollywood, cameras cranked by hand under the blazing California sun, and young dreamers building an industry that would change the world. Hollywood's journey had only just begun. Part 3, The Silent Era, 1900s, 1920s. Introduction. When the world fell silent, but the screen spoke. Before synchronized sound revolutionized the movies, Hollywood was built on silence, or at least on films without audible dialogue. Yet these movies were far from quiet. The silent era, spanning roughly from the 1900s to the late 1920s, gave the world some of its first global celebrities, iconic directors, and cinematic language. It was an age of exaggerated gestures, title cards, and live orchestras in theaters, but it was also a period of experimentation, innovation, and unprecedented cultural impact. This chapter immerses us in the golden days of silent film, when Charlie Chaplin's tramp shuffled across the screen, Rudolph Valentino seduced audiences, and Hollywood defined what movies could be. The language of silent film. Silent cinema had to invent its own grammar to tell stories. Exaggerated acting, with no spoken dialogue, actors conveyed emotion through facial expression and body movement. Title cards, intertitles provided dialogue or narration to clarify plot points. Cinematography innovations, close-ups, cross-cutting, and montage developed during this period. Music as voice, every screening was accompanied by live music, sometimes a lone piano, sometimes a full orchestra. Audiences didn't just watch silent films, they experienced them as multisensory events. The rise of the star system. Silent film birthed the world's first movie stars. Charlie Chaplin, his Little Tramp character, with bowler hat and cane, became the most recognized figure on Earth. His mix of comedy and pathos made audiences laugh and cry. Mary Pickford, America's sweetheart, beloved for her roles as spunky young women, co-founded United Artists with Chaplin, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith. Rudolph Valentino, the matinee idol, famed for the chic, 1921, inspired mass hysteria and was mourned by thousands after his sudden death in 1926. Clara Bow, the It Girl, symbol of the Roaring Twenties, liberated flapper spirit. These stars were larger than life, their images spread worldwide in fan magazines and posters. The studios take shape. During the silent era, the foundations of Hollywood's studio system were laid. Paramount Pictures grew rapidly under Adolph Zucker's leadership, dominating distribution. Warner Brothers, MGM, and Universal began expanding from regional operations to national powerhouses. Production control, studios controlled actors, directors, and theaters, locking talent into long-term contracts. Hollywood became not just an artistic hub, but an industrial machine. Pioneering directors. The silent era produced directors who defined cinematic storytelling. D.W. Griffith, The Birth of a Nation, 1915, was controversial for its racism but groundbreaking in film technique, with epic scope and innovative editing. Cecil B. DeMille specialized in lavish spectacles, from biblical epics to romantic melodramas. Erich von Stroheim, known for obsessive detail and extravagant productions, such as Greed, 1924. Buster Keaton, actor-director master of physical comedy and elaborate stunts, with classics like The General, 1926. These directors turned film into a true art form. The global reach of silent cinema. Hollywood's films quickly spread across the globe. Universal language, silent films transcended linguistic barriers, relying on visual storytelling. International popularity, stars like Chaplin and Valentino were beloved in Asia, Europe, and South America. Competition. While Germany's UFA studios and Soviet filmmakers like Eisenstein thrived, Hollywood's volume and glamour dominated. By the 1920s, Hollywood was the undisputed world capital of cinema. Scandals and public fascination. The silent era was glamorous, but also scandal-ridden. Fatty Arbuckle scandal, the comedian's trial for manslaughter shocked audiences and hurt Hollywood's reputation. Drug use and affairs, tales of Hollywood excess fueled moral outrage. Censorship pressure, calls for decency led to the creation of the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, MPPDA, led by Will Hays, which would later enforce the Hays Code. The public both idolized and scrutinized Hollywood, a duality that remains today. The golden glow of the 1920s. By the 1920s, Hollywood had matured into a global phenomenon. Grand theaters, movie palaces like New York's Roxy or LA's $1 Million Theater offered luxurious viewing. Weekly ritual. For millions, attending the movies was part of daily life. Genres flourish, westerns, slapstick comedies, melodramas, and historical epics all thrived. Cinema had become America's dominant cultural export. The sound of change. Yet by the mid-1920s, change was on the horizon. Vitaphone system, Warner Brothers experimented with synchronized sound-on-disc technology. The Jazz Singer, 1927, not the first talkie, but the first major film with synchronized dialogue, shocking audiences. Silent stars in peril, many actors with heavy accents or stagey styles could not adapt to sound. The silent era ended suddenly, not with a whimper, but with the shout of, "You ain't heard nothin' yet." Closing reflection. The silent era was Hollywood's foundation, an age of experimentation, glamour, and global reach. Though its films lacked audible dialogue, they spoke volumes through their artistry and emotion. Silent cinema gave us stars, studios, scandals, and the very grammar of film. As you drift to sleep, imagine the flicker of a black and white screen in a grand theater, an orchestra swelling beneath, and Charlie Chaplin tipping his hat to the audience. The silence of this era was not emptiness, it was the canvas upon which the language of cinema was first written. Part 4, The Birth of the Studio System. Introduction, From Chaos to Control. In the earliest years of American cinema, filmmaking was experimental, disorganized, and fragmented. Dozens of small companies sprang up across the country, often producing short films for local audiences. But as demand for movies skyrocketed in the 1910s and 1920s, a new model of organization emerged, the studio system. This was not just a method of producing films, it was an entire industrial empire that reshaped Hollywood into a cultural machine. This chapter explores how the studio system came to dominate Hollywood, how it structured the industry, and how its influence still lingers in the modern film business. The rise of the Big Five. At the heart of the studio system were five companies that came to dominate Hollywood by the 1930s. Paramount Pictures, founded by Adolph Zukor, it specialized in glossy productions and was one of the first vertically integrated studios. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, MGM. Renowned for its production values and its star-studded roster, led by Louis B. Mayer. Warner Brothers, known for gritty urban dramas and eventually for pioneering sound with The Jazz Singer, 1927. 20th Century Fox, created from a merger, it built a reputation for musicals and historical epics. RKO Pictures, the youngest of the five, but remembered for films like King Kong, 1933, and later Orson Welles' Citizen Kane, 1941. These studios became the beating heart of Hollywood. The Little Three. Alongside the Big Five were the so-called Little Three. Universal Pictures, specialized in horror and genre films, producing Dracula, 1931, and Frankenstein, 1931. Columbia Pictures, a smaller studio that rose on the back of strong comedies and partnerships with directors like Frank Capra. United Artists, founded in 1919 by Chaplin, Pickford, Fairbanks, and Griffith, it gave stars and filmmakers greater creative control, a counterbalance to the big studio system. Though smaller, these studios carved out niches that gave them lasting influence. Vertical integration, the factory of dreams. The studio system was built on vertical integration, complete control of production, distribution, and exhibition. Production, studios owned massive lots with sound stages, costume departments, and backlots. Films were produced like clockwork, often dozens per year. Distribution, each studio controlled its own distribution networks, ensuring their films reached theaters nationwide. Exhibition, crucially, the studio's own theaters. Paramount Theaters, MGM's Loew's chain, and others gave guaranteed screens for their films. This integration created both efficiency and monopoly power. The star system. Perhaps the most glamorous aspect of the studio system was the star system. Contracts. Actors signed long-term contracts, often 7 years, giving studios near total control over their careers. Manufactured personas. Studios cultivated specific images. Clark Gable as the rugged leading man, Greta Garbo as the mysterious beauty, Judy Garland as the wholesome girl next door. Publicity machines, fan magazines and studio-controlled press fed the public carefully crafted narratives. Control of lives, stars were often told how to dress, whom to date, and even when to marry, all for publicity's sake. The star system created icons, but often at personal cost. The directors and craftsmen. While stars were front-facing, studios also employed armies of directors, writers, and craftsmen. Directors, often treated as contract employees rather than auteurs. They were expected to work quickly and deliver studio visions. Writers, screenwriting was collaborative, with multiple writers contributing to one script. Technical staff, cinematographers, editors, set designers, and costume departments worked full-time for studios, ensuring a consistent look. Studios became dream factories, producing art on an assembly line. Genres and house styles. Each studio cultivated its own distinctive style. Warner Brothers, gangster films, urban dramas, socially conscious stories. MGM, lavish musicals and glossy family entertainment. Paramount, sophisticated comedies and European flair. Universal, horror classics that defined the genre. Columbia, sharp comedies and Capra's populist dramas. Audiences often knew what to expect from each studio, much like brands today. Audiences and movie palaces. The studio system also shaped how audiences experienced film. Movie palaces, ornate theaters built in major cities, offering luxurious escapes from daily life. Double features, affordable tickets meant hours of entertainment, main features, B-movies, newsreels, and cartoons. Weekly ritual, for many Americans, going to the movies was a weekly or even daily activity. Hollywood became central to everyday life. Challenges and criticism. Even in its prime, the studio system faced scrutiny. Monopoly concerns. Independent producers complained of unfair exclusion. Star rebellions. Some stars, like Bette Davis, clashed with studios over restrictive contracts. Moral backlash. Hollywood scandals and risque content in the 1920s led to calls for censorship, paving the way for the Hays Code in the 1930s. The system thrived, but its cracks were already visible. Closing reflection. The studio system transformed Hollywood from a chaotic experiment into a global empire of storytelling. It created the stars, genres, and experiences that defined American cinema, while also laying the groundwork for its eventual challenges. As you drift into rest, imagine the golden lights of a 1930s movie palace, audiences filing in for a double feature, fan magazines filled with studio stars on every newsstand, and the steady hum of a Hollywood dream factory at full steam. This was the studio system, glamorous, efficient, and absolute. Part 5: The Coming of Sound. Introduction: When the movies began to speak. By the late 1920s, Hollywood had established itself as the capital of world cinema. Silent films filled majestic movie palaces, stars were idolized globally, and directors had refined the language of visual storytelling. Yet, something was missing: sound. For years, inventors dreamed of synchronizing voices, music, and sound effects with moving pictures. When the breakthrough finally arrived, it transformed the industry overnight. The talkies brought both excitement and upheaval. Some silent stars saw their careers vanish, others adapted and thrived, and entire genres were reinvented. This chapter tells the story of how Hollywood learned to speak. Early attempts at talking pictures. The idea of sound in film predates the 1920s. Phonograph experiments. As early as the 1890s, Edison paired his kinetoscope with phonographs, but synchronization was unreliable. Sound-on-disc systems. In the 1910s, companies experimented with discs played alongside films, but skipping or misalignment ruined the effect. Audience expectations. For decades, most viewers didn't demand synchronized voices, live musicians or narrators already made films feel alive. Technology was close, but not yet practical. Warner Brothers and the Vitaphone gamble. It was Warner Brothers, then a relatively minor studio, that changed history. The Vitaphone system, 1926, developed with Western Electric. It recorded sound on large phonograph discs synced to projectors. Don Juan, 1926, the first feature-length film using Vitaphone. It had a synchronized musical score and sound effects, but no spoken dialogue. The gamble. Warner Brothers invested heavily in sound despite skepticism from major studios. The gamble would soon pay off spectacularly. The Jazz Singer, 1927, You Ain't Heard Nothin' Yet. The true turning point came with The Jazz Singer. Al Jolson's performance. A part-talkie film, mostly silent with intertitles, but featuring several songs and improvised dialogue. Famous line, wait a minute, you ain't heard nothin' yet. Those words electrified audiences. Cultural impact. The film demonstrated that synchronized speech could thrill audiences and transform storytelling. Though modest in structure, The Jazz Singer was revolutionary. The sound revolution spreads. After The Jazz Singer, the shift was unstoppable. Conversion costs. Studios spent millions to retrofit theaters with sound systems. Rapid adoption. By 1929, most major studios were producing all-talkie films. Audience demand. Crowds clamored for more. The novelty of hearing voices was irresistible. In just 2 years, Hollywood went from silent to speaking. Winners and losers of the sound era. the transition was not kind to everyone. Silent stars lost. Some actors, beloved for their screen presence, struggled with heavy accents, poor diction, or stagey delivery. Others resisted change. New stars born, performers with theater experience, trained voices, or singing ability became the new icons. Charlie Chaplin's resistance. Chaplin resisted sound for years, releasing City Lights, 1931, and Modern Times, 1936, as silent films with music but no dialogue, arguing that the tramp transcended speech. The sound revolution created new hierarchies of stardom. New genres, new possibilities. Sound didn't just add voices, it reinvented film. Musicals, songs and dances became Hollywood's hottest genre, from Broadway Melody, 1929, to Busby Berkeley's extravagant spectacles. Gangster films, sharp-talking antiheroes like James Cagney made crime dramas thrilling. Screwball comedies, rapid-fire dialogue and witty banter defined films of the 1930s. Horror, films like Dracula, 1931, and Frankenstein, 1931, exploited eerie soundscapes to terrify audiences. Cinema's palette expanded enormously. The technical challenges. The transition was not seamless. Bulky equipment. Early microphones were clumsy, requiring actors to stay close or hidden in props. Camera noise. Cameras were noisy, so they had to be enclosed in soundproof booths, limiting mobility. Learning curve. Directors and cinematographers had to relearn how to stage and shoot films. But innovation quickly followed, and within a decade, sound films were as fluid as silent ones. Global impact of talkies. Sound reshaped not just Hollywood, but world cinema. Language barriers. Silent films had universal appeal. Talkies fractured markets along linguistic lines. Multilingual productions. Studios experimented with filming multiple versions of films in different languages, often with new casts. Dubbing and subtitles. These became permanent features of world cinema, enabling global distribution. Hollywood remained dominant, but sound required adaptation. Closing reflection. The coming of sound was one of the most dramatic shifts in Hollywood history. It toppled some careers, elevated others, and created entire genres. More importantly, it proved that cinema was not static, it could reinvent itself radically. As you rest, picture a theater in 1927, the flicker of the jazz singer on screen, the sudden shock as Al Jolson's voice fills the hall. Gasps, laughter, applause, it was the moment movies began to speak, and they have never stopped since. Part 6, The Golden Age of Hollywood, 1930s, 1940s. Introduction, lights, glamour, and the dream factory. The 1930s and 1940s are often called the Golden Age of Hollywood. This was the era when the studio system reached its peak, when stars were polished into icons, and when the movie industry became one of the most powerful cultural forces in the world. Against the backdrop of the Great Depression, World War II, and post-war changes, Hollywood not only entertained audiences, it shaped the very identity of modern America. This chapter steps into that glittering era, where screwball comedies and musicals dazzled, film noir cast its shadows, and larger-than-life stars became household names across the globe. The studio system in full bloom. By the 1930s, the Big Five studios, Paramount, MGM, Warner Brothers, Fox, and RKO, had cemented their dominance. Factory-like output, each studio produced dozens of films yearly, creating a steady flow of entertainment. Backlots and sets, studios became self-contained worlds, with entire city streets, historical castles, and western towns ready for filming. Talent contracts, actors, directors, and writers worked under long-term contracts, ensuring loyalty and stability. This industrial model allowed studios to churn out films at an unprecedented scale, feeding America's insatiable appetite for cinema. Escapism during the Great Depression. The 1930s were marked by economic collapse, yet Hollywood thrived by offering hope and escape. Musicals. Lavish productions like 42nd Street, 1933, and Busby Berkeley's kaleidoscopic choreography dazzled Depression-era audiences. Screwball comedies, films like It Happened One Night, 1934, and Bringing Up Baby, 1938, provided laughter amidst hardship. Romance and glamour, stars like Clark Gable and Carole Lombard embodied escapist fantasies of love and sophistication. Movies became not just entertainment, but therapy for a weary nation. The Code of Decency, Hollywood's censorship. Hollywood's freedom in the 1920s had drawn criticism for risque content. By the mid-1930s, censorship took formal shape. Hays Code, 1934 strict rules banned nudity, profanity, excessive violence, and immoral behavior. Impact on storytelling, filmmakers used innuendo, clever dialogue, and subtext to bypass restrictions, leading to some of cinema's most witty writing. Consistency, the code shaped American cinema for 3 decades, keeping films clean for family audiences. Ironically, censorship sparked some of the Golden Age's most creative storytelling. The stars who shined the brightest. The Golden Age produced some of the most enduring stars in history. Clark Gable, the King of Hollywood, immortalized in Gone with the Wind, 1939. Bette Davis, fierce, commanding performances in dramas like Jezebel, 1938. Judy Garland, beloved for her voice and role in The Wizard of Oz, 1939. Humphrey Bogart, quintessential tough guy, star of Casablanca, 1942. Katharine Hepburn, independent, sharp, redefining women's roles on screen. These stars weren't just actors, they were mythic figures who defined Hollywood glamour. New genres take shape. The Golden Age saw the birth or flowering of iconic film genres. Musicals, sparkling dance numbers and orchestral scores became staples. Screwball comedy, quick wit, rapid banter, and gender role reversals thrived. Gangster films, Warner Brothers perfected gritty crime dramas like The Public Enemy, 1931. Horror. Universal unleashed Dracula, 1931, Frankenstein, 1931, and The Mummy, 1932. Film noir, 1940 shadowy thrillers like Double Indemnity, 1944, and The Maltese Falcon, 1941, reflected post-war disillusionment. The variety of genres mirrored the complexity of American life. Hollywood and World War II. During World War II, Hollywood became part of the war effort. Propaganda films, movies like Why We Fight educated and rallied audiences. Patriotic themes, stars like James Stewart and John Wayne played heroic soldiers on screen. Stars in uniform, many actors served, Clark Gable as a bomber gunner, Jimmy Stewart as a pilot. Entertainment abroad, the USO sent stars to entertain troops overseas. Hollywood was both battlefield and morale booster, shaping wartime culture. Movie palaces and the weekly escape. Going to the movies became a ritual for millions. Palatial theaters, ornate, cathedral-like theaters with chandeliers and velvet seats offered escapism before the film even began. Double features. Audiences enjoyed a main film, a B-picture, a cartoon, and a newsreel for one ticket. Community ritual, even in small towns, theaters became cultural hubs. Movies were not just art, they were a social heartbeat. Challenges on the horizon. Despite its dominance, the Golden Age faced looming threats. Labor strikes, behind the glamour, workers fought for better pay and conditions. Antitrust concerns, the studio's monopolistic grip on theaters drew government scrutiny. Television, by the late 1940s, TV loomed as a rival, threatening cinema's monopoly on mass entertainment. The Golden Age sparkled, but cracks were forming beneath its gilded surface. Closing reflection. The Golden Age of Hollywood was a time of glittering stars, polished films, and cultural influence unmatched in history. It was a dream factory at full strength, shaping not only American entertainment but global imagination. As you close your eyes, picture the marquee lights of a 1930s movie palace, an orchestra warming up, the curtain rising to reveal Judy Garland singing, or Humphrey Bogart lighting a cigarette in a smoky Casablanca bar. This was the golden age, an era of dreams, crafted in celluloid, that still lingers in our collective memory. Part 7, Hollywood and World War II. Introduction: When the Dream Factory went to war. By the late 1930s, Hollywood had established itself as America's cultural powerhouse, dazzling audiences with musicals, comedies, and dramas. But as the world descended into World War II, the Dream Factory was asked to serve a new purpose. Film became not just entertainment, but a weapon, rallying morale, shaping public opinion, and projecting American values abroad. In this chapter, we explore how Hollywood mobilized for war, the films it produced, the stars who put on uniforms, and the way the industry reshaped itself during one of the most turbulent decades in history. Hollywood before America entered the war. When war broke out in Europe in 1939, Hollywood was cautious. Neutral America, the United States remained officially neutral until 1941, and isolationist groups criticized films that leaned toward intervention. Coded messaging. Studios produced films with subtle anti-Nazi themes, Confessions of a Nazi Spy in 1939, testing political waters. British influence. Hollywood was sympathetic to Britain, and films often highlighted European struggles against fascism. Even before Pearl Harbor, the battle for hearts and minds was underway in American theaters. The Office of War Information, OWI. After the U.S. entered the war in 1941, the government formalized Hollywood's role. OWI guidelines, scripts were reviewed to ensure they supported the war effort, encouraged unity, and avoided harmful stereotypes. Themes required patriotism, sacrifice, and the necessity of fighting fascism. Balance. OWI insisted that films entertain as well as inform. Morale was as important as messaging. Hollywood became a quasi-official partner in the war. Propaganda on the silver screen. Films during the war years carried strong patriotic messages. Why We Fight, 1942 to 1945. Frank Capra directed this government-commissioned documentary series to explain America's involvement. Feature films. Mrs. Miniver, 1942, rallied sympathy for Britain. Casablanca, 1942, dramatized sacrifice for the cause, and Yankee Doodle Dandy, 1942, glorified American spirit. Enemy depictions. Nazis and Japanese soldiers were portrayed as villains, often simplified into caricatures. Cinema was mobilized as a storytelling battlefield. Stars in uniform. Hollywood stars didn't just act patriotic, they lived it. Jimmy Stewart left his career at its height to serve as a U.S. Air Force pilot, flying combat missions. Clark Gable joined the Army Air Forces, flying missions over Europe. Henry Fonda served in the Navy, while others like Gene Autry enlisted as well. Bob Hope, although not enlisted, he became synonymous with troop entertainment, touring with the USO. Stars became symbols of sacrifice, embodying the unity of Hollywood and the military. Women on screen and behind the scenes. The war reshaped women's roles in Hollywood as well. On screen, films depicted strong, independent women holding the home front, echoing the real-life figure of Rosie the Riveter. Behind the camera, women found opportunities in writing, editing, and even directing short films. Stars like Bette Davis and Marlene Dietrich raised war bonds, entertained troops, and pushed boundaries for female representation. Hollywood mirrored and influenced the shifting roles of women in wartime society. Cartoons and animated propaganda. Animation also joined the war effort. Disney Studios created training films for the military and propaganda shorts like Der Führer's Face, 1943. Looney Tunes. Warner Brothers used Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck in shorts mocking Axis leaders. Purpose. Cartoons lightened the mood while reinforcing patriotism. Even children's entertainment was mobilized. Documentaries and newsreels. Beyond features and cartoons, non-fiction film played a crucial role. Newsreels, shown before movies, they brought footage from the front lines to American audiences weekly. Combat filmmakers, military cameramen risked lives capturing real battles. Impact, for many, newsreels were their only visual connection to the war abroad. Film literally brought the war home. Post-war reflections. As the war ended in 1945, Hollywood shifted its focus. Triumph narratives, films celebrated victory but also acknowledged sacrifice. Veteran stories, Hollywood began depicting the struggles of soldiers returning home, foreshadowing the darker themes of post-war film noir. Global influence, American films were exported worldwide, reinforcing Hollywood's cultural dominance. The war left a permanent mark on both cinema and society. Closing reflection. Hollywood during World War II was more than entertainment, it was part of the arsenal of democracy. Films, stars, cartoons, and newsreels became weapons of persuasion, comfort, and inspiration. As you drift to sleep, imagine the glow of a 1940s theater, an audience watching Casablanca for the first time, hearts stirred by its message of sacrifice and love for freedom. In that darkened hall, Hollywood wasn't just telling stories, it was fighting a war of ideas. Part 8, The Blacklist and the McCarthy-Era. Introduction, when fear reached the silver screen. By the late 1940s, Hollywood had survived the Depression and played its part in World War II. The industry was riding high in global influence, but a storm was gathering. As the Cold War deepened, suspicion of communism spread through America like wildfire. In Washington, politicians launched investigations into alleged communist influence across society, and Hollywood, with its immense cultural power, became a prime target. This chapter explores the Hollywood blacklist and the McCarthy-era. A time when careers were ruined, fear silenced voices, and the dream factory became entangled in a nightmare of paranoia. The political climate of fear. The United States in the late 1940s was gripped by anxiety. The Cold War begins, tensions with the Soviet Union escalated, fueling fears of infiltration and espionage. McCarthyism. Senator Joseph McCarthy rose to prominence in the early 1950s by claiming widespread communist infiltration. Hollywood as target. As the nation's storyteller, Hollywood was seen as a potential avenue for spreading subversive ideas. This paranoia created a climate where accusation alone could end a career. The House Un-American Activities Committee, WAC. The WAC became the most visible tool in investigating Hollywood. Hearings in 1947 called dozens of screenwriters, directors, and producers to testify about communist ties. The Hollywood 10, a group of writers and directors, including Dalton Trumbo and Ring Lardner Jr., refused to cooperate, citing First Amendment rights. They were cited for contempt of Congress and imprisoned. Friendly witnesses, some stars, like Walt Disney, Ronald Reagan, and Gary Cooper, testified and denounced communism. The hearings set the stage for one of Hollywood's darkest chapters. The blacklist begins. The fallout from WAC was swift and brutal. Studios react. To avoid public backlash, major studios announced they would not employ anyone suspected of communist ties. Careers destroyed, hundreds of writers, directors, actors, and technicians were barred from work. Many never recovered. Ghostwriting. Some, like Dalton Trumbo, continued writing under pseudonyms or through fronts. His later Oscar win for Roman Holiday, 1953, written in secret, highlighted the absurdity of the blacklist. The blacklist turned suspicion into professional exile. The role of fear and informants. The system thrived on fear and betrayal. Naming names. Witnesses were pressured to identify colleagues as communists. Some complied to save their careers. Division, friendships and collaborations shattered. The industry was split between those who cooperated and those who resisted. Atmosphere of silence. Many simply avoided political discussion altogether, fearing even casual remarks could be used against them. Hollywood's collaborative spirit was poisoned by mistrust. The impact on film content. The blacklist didn't just affect individuals, it shaped the films themselves. Avoidance of controversy, studios steered clear of political themes that might draw scrutiny. Rise of safe genres, westerns, musicals, and historical epics flourished while socially challenging stories declined. Cold War propaganda. Some films actively promoted anti-communist messages, reinforcing the national mood. Creativity was curtailed, and fear left its fingerprints on the art of cinema. McCarthy and the wider culture. While WAC targeted Hollywood, McCarthyism extended across American life. Government workers, thousands faced loyalty tests or lost jobs. Academia and media, professors, journalists, and artists were silenced. Chilling effect, the idea of free speech itself was under siege. Hollywood's ordeal was part of a larger national trauma. The cracks in the blacklist. Despite its power, the blacklist was not invincible. Secret successes. Blacklisted writers like Trumbo secretly penned acclaimed works, exposing the blacklist's futility. Courageous challenges. Some filmmakers and studios began to quietly hire blacklisted talent. The breaking point. In 1960, Trumbo was publicly credited for Exodus and Spartacus, effectively ending the blacklist. The wall of silence finally crumbled under its own contradictions. Legacy of the blacklist. The era left lasting scars on Hollywood. Destroyed careers. Many never recovered their livelihoods, even after the blacklist ended. Mistrust of politics. Hollywood became wary of overt political messaging for decades. Moral reflection. Later generations have looked back on the blacklist as a shameful chapter of fear triumphing over freedom. The Dream Factory learned how fragile dreams could be. Closing reflection. The Hollywood blacklist was a time when whispers could end careers, when fear dictated art, and when the promise of free expression was smothered by suspicion. Yet it was also a time of resilience, of artists who found ways to create in the shadows and who, ultimately, helped dismantle the machinery of fear. As you drift into rest, imagine a hearing room in Washington, the flashbulbs popping, the tense faces of actors and writers under questioning. Beyond the theater screens and glamour, Hollywood itself was on trial, caught in a drama as chilling as any it put on film. Part 9. The Fall of the Studio System. Introduction. The End of the Golden Machine. From the 1920s through the 1940s, Hollywood's studio system was a well-oiled machine, producing a steady flow of films, shaping stars, and dominating theaters across America. But by the late 1940s and into the 1950s, cracks appeared in this empire. Court rulings, labor disputes, cultural shifts, and new technologies like television dismantled the vertical integration that had defined Hollywood for decades. This chapter tells the story of how the studio system fell, reshaping Hollywood forever and paving the way for new forms of filmmaking. The Paramount Decree of 1948. The most decisive blow came from the U.S. Supreme Court. United States versus Paramount Pictures Incorporated, 1948. The government ruled that studios could not own both production and exhibition. Their ownership of theaters was deemed monopolistic. Theaters sold off, Paramount and other studios were forced to divest their theater chains. Impact. Without guaranteed theaters, studios had to compete for screens, weakening their dominance. The Paramount Decree dismantled the backbone of vertical integration. Labor strikes and rising costs. Behind Hollywood's glamour, discontent had long simmered. Labor unrest. In the 1940s, strikes erupted as unions fought for better wages and conditions. The 1945 Hollywood Black Friday strike turned violent outside Warner Brothers studios. Cost of production. With fewer guaranteed profits from theater ownership, studios became cautious, cutting back on mass production. Independent producers rise. Freed from studio monopolies, independent filmmakers gained leverage in negotiating distribution. The balance of power shifted slowly but surely away from the studios. The rise of television. If the Paramount Decree was a legal blow, television was a cultural earthquake. Household adoption. By the early 1950s, millions of American households had televisions. Competition. Families who once flocked to theaters now stayed home for free entertainment. Decline of weekly attendance. Moviegoing, once a ritual, dropped sharply. Studio resistance. Initially, studios banned stars from appearing on TV, fearing it would cheapen them. But the tide was irreversible. Hollywood was forced to compete with the glowing box in every living room. The decline of the star contract system. The star system, once central to studio power, began to unravel. Actors fight back. Stars like Bette Davis and Olivia de Havilland challenged restrictive contracts, winning legal victories that gave actors more freedom. Independent negotiations. Stars began negotiating project-by-project contracts, weakening studio control. Rise of agents. Hollywood agents gained influence, negotiating lucrative deals for stars outside studio authority. The studios lost their grip on the very icons they had created. Changing audience tastes. The post-war audience wanted something different. Grittier stories. Post-war disillusionment fueled demand for realism, crime dramas, and film noir. New voices. Independent filmmakers and smaller studios catered to changing tastes. International cinema. Foreign films from Italy, France, and Japan gained popularity, challenging Hollywood's dominance. The factory model of predictable films no longer seemed enough. The big epics and gimmicks. In response, Hollywood doubled down on spectacle. Cinerama, CinemaScope, and 3D. Studios experimented with widescreen formats and technologies to lure audiences back. Biblical epics and historical spectacles. Films like The Ten Commandments, 1956, and Ben-Hur, 1959, showcased massive sets and casts. Star vehicles. Studios banked on megaproductions to stay competitive. Though successful at times, these epics were costly gambles that exposed studios to risk. The role of television partnerships. Ironically, what studios once feared became an ally. Selling old films. Studios licensed older films to television networks, earning revenue from their archives. New productions. Some studios began producing television shows, establishing a new revenue stream. Cross-promotion. Stars appeared on TV to promote films, blurring the boundary between mediums. Television became less an enemy and more an uneasy partner. The cultural shifts of the 1950s. Broader societal changes also eroded the old system. Suburbanization. As families moved to suburbs, theaters lost convenient access to audiences. Car culture. Drive-in theaters grew in popularity, changing the experience of moviegoing. Youth market. Teenagers became a new audience segment, influencing film genres like rock and roll musicals and horror. Hollywood adapted, but the unified control of the studio era was gone. Closing reflection. The fall of the studio system was not a single event but a convergence of forces: legal rulings, labor challenges, television, changing tastes, and cultural transformation. By the 1950s, Hollywood had lost its monopoly on American entertainment, but it was far from finished. Freed from the rigidity of the old system, cinema would soon enter a new phase of creativity and rebellion. As you drift into rest, imagine the glowing marquees of a downtown theater in 1948, slowly dimming as television sets flicker in living rooms across America. The studio boss's iron grip was loosening, and a new Hollywood was waiting to be born. Part 10, New Hollywood, 1960s, 1970s. Introduction. When the old guard fell silent. By the early 1960s, Hollywood was in crisis. The studio system had collapsed, television had stolen much of its audience, and the glossy epics of the 1950s were failing to connect with a younger generation restless for change. Out of this decline emerged a new wave of filmmakers who rejected the polished formulas of the past and embraced rawness, realism, and rebellion. This was the era of New Hollywood, a revolution that turned directors into stars and reshaped the very language of cinema. Seeds of rebellion. The 1960s was a decade of upheaval in America. Civil rights movement, audiences wanted stories that reflected changing racial dynamics. Vietnam War, growing mistrust of government fueled darker, more cynical films. Counterculture, the rise of youth culture, rock music, and new freedoms demanded fresh voices. Decline of old genres. Musicals and biblical epics seemed out of touch with the mood of the times. Hollywood needed reinvention, and young filmmakers were ready to supply it. The first sparks, Bonnie and Clyde and Easy Rider. Two films in particular symbolized the break with the past. Bonnie and Clyde, 1967, directed by Arthur Penn, it shocked audiences with its mix of glamour, sexuality, and graphic violence. It proved audiences wanted riskier, more daring stories. Easy Rider, 1969, directed by Dennis Hopper, this low-budget road movie, drenched in counterculture spirit and rock music, became a cultural phenomenon. Together, these films announced that the new generation had arrived. The director as auteur. In the new Hollywood era, directors became the central creative force. Francis Ford Coppola, his Godfather films, 1972, 1974, redefined the gangster genre with operatic scope. Martin Scorsese captured urban grit in Mean Streets, 1973, and Taxi Driver, 1976. Steven Spielberg, with Jaws, 1975. He invented the modern blockbuster while maintaining a director's personal stamp. George Lucas, Star Wars, 1977, fused myth, fantasy, and modern spectacle. Robert Altman, known for sprawling ensemble films like MASH*, 1970, and Nashville, 1975. The director as auteur became Hollywood's new identity. A new kind of storytelling. New Hollywood films broke from convention. Anti-heroes, characters like Travis Bickle, Taxi Driver, and Michael Corleone, The Godfather, reflected a darker view of humanity. Ambiguity, endings were often unresolved or bleak, challenging audiences. Realism, violence, sexuality, and social commentary entered mainstream cinema. Youth culture, rock soundtracks replaced orchestral scores, tying cinema to pop culture. The Dream Factory became a mirror of America's anxieties. The rise of the blockbuster. Ironically, New Hollywood's experiments paved the way for the blockbuster. Jaws, 1975. Spielberg's Thriller became the first summer blockbuster, a cultural event that redefined marketing and release strategies. Star Wars, 1977. George Lucas's space opera cemented the blockbuster formula with merchandising, sequels, and worldwide appeal. The blockbuster was born out of rebellion, yet quickly became a new kind of Hollywood machine. Studios and directors, a tense alliance. While studios gave directors unprecedented freedom, tensions grew. Budget overruns, films like Heaven's Gate, 1980, spiraled out of control, bankrupting studios. Risky content, not all experimental films found audiences. Some were too dark or esoteric. Clash of power, directors sought artistic control, studios demanded commercial success. New Hollywood thrived on tension, but its excesses sowed the seeds of its decline. Legacy of New Hollywood. Despite its eventual collapse, New Hollywood left an indelible mark. Enduring classics. Films like The Godfather, Chinatown, Apocalypse Now, and Taxi Driver remain cornerstones of cinema. Director-driven films, the idea of the director as central artist persists today. Genre reinvention, westerns, gangster films, and science fiction were all reimagined for modern audiences. Gateway to blockbusters, Spielberg and Lucas bridged New Hollywood artistry with blockbuster success, shaping modern film culture. New Hollywood was both rebellion and rebirth. Closing reflection. The New Hollywood era was messy, daring, and revolutionary. It was an era when young filmmakers seized control of the dream factory and infused it with the grit of the streets, the chaos of war, and the imagination of myth. It gave us both anti-heroes and blockbusters, raw realism and epic fantasy. As you close your eyes, picture the smoky streets of Taxi Driver's New York, the operatic sweep of The Godfather, and the exhilaration of Star Wars. This was New Hollywood. A bold reimagining of cinema that forever changed the way the world tells stories. Part 11, The Blockbuster Era, 1970s, 1980s. Introduction, a new kind of Hollywood. In the wake of the rebellious creativity of New Hollywood, the industry stumbled upon a formula that would forever change its DNA, the blockbuster. These were not just films, they were events, designed to dominate the box office, spawn merchandise, and capture global audiences. From the mid-1970s through the 1980s, the blockbuster transformed Hollywood from a risky art house for young directors into a commercial juggernaut. This chapter explores the birth and growth of the blockbuster era, how it reshaped filmmaking, and the enduring influence it still holds today. Jaws, 1975, the first modern blockbuster. Steven Spielberg's Jaws marked the beginning of the blockbuster phenomenon. Summer release, unlike most studios, which avoided summer as a dead season, Universal launched Jaws in June 1975. Wide release strategy. Distributed across hundreds of theaters simultaneously rather than slowly rolling out. Marketing blitz, TV ads, posters, and the iconic theme music by John Williams created national anticipation. Result, it broke box office records, becoming the highest-grossing film of its time. Audiences no longer just watched a film, they experienced a cultural moment. Star Wars, 1977, the event movie. If Jaws invented the blockbuster, George Lucas's Star Wars perfected it. Myth and spectacle, Lucas fused mythological storytelling, science fiction, and cutting-edge special effects. Merchandising revolution, toys, books, and collectibles created a new revenue stream, turning films into global franchises. Fan culture, Star Wars birthed one of the most dedicated fan communities in history. Financial success, it quickly surpassed Jaws as the top-grossing film, cementing the blockbuster model. Star Wars was not just a movie, it was a universe, a lifestyle, and a marketing empire. Defining features of the blockbuster. Blockbusters came to share certain qualities. High concept, easily pitched in a single line, a shark terrorizes a town, a space opera about good versus evil. Spectacle, special effects, large set pieces, and action designed for the big screen. Mass appeal, stories crafted for broad audiences, cutting across age and culture. Event status, built around heavy marketing, premieres, and global release strategies. The blockbuster was as much about experience as storytelling. The rise of the summer movie season. Before the mid-1970s, summer was considered a weak season. The blockbuster changed that. School vacations, studios realized students were free in summer, creating a perfect target audience. Repeat viewings, young audiences watched favorites multiple times. Tradition established, the biggest films of each year were now launched in summer, making it Hollywood's most lucrative season. Summer became synonymous with Hollywood spectacle. Expanding the formula, the 1980s. The 1980s refined the blockbuster model further. Sequels and franchises, The Empire Strikes Back, 1980, Indiana Jones, 1981, and Back to the Future, 1985, showed the power of ongoing sagas. Action heroes, Sylvester Stallone, Rocky, Rambo, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, Terminator, Predator, became global icons. Family hits, Steven Spielberg's E.T., 1982, and Robert Zemeckis' Who Framed Roger Rabbit, 1988, expanded appeal. Comedies as blockbusters, films like Ghostbusters, 1984, showed comedies could also dominate box offices. The blockbuster became Hollywood's default mode. Technology and spectacle. The the blockbuster was fueled by new technologies. Special effects, industrial light and magic, ILM, set new standards with Star Wars and beyond. Sound systems, Dolby Stereo created immersive experiences. Marketing tie-ins, VHS and cable expanded the life cycle of blockbusters beyond theaters. Technology and commerce merged seamlessly. The critics and cultural concerns. Not everyone welcomed the blockbuster takeover. Critics' worries, many feared blockbusters prioritized spectacle over substance. Loss of risk-taking, smaller, experimental films had less space in a market dominated by expensive tentpoles. Corporate control, studios became more risk-averse, treating films as investments rather than art. The blockbuster era sparked debates still alive today, art versus commerce. Globalization of Hollywood. Blockbusters also cemented Hollywood's global dominance. Worldwide distribution, films like Star Wars and E.T. earned more overseas than domestically. Cultural export, blockbusters became America's most powerful cultural ambassador. Global marketing, posters, toys, and soundtracks reached every corner of the world. Hollywood became not just American, it became global culture. Closing reflection. The blockbuster era redefined what movies could be, not just stories, but events that united audiences worldwide. From the terror of Jaws to the wonder of Star Wars and the heroics of Indiana Jones, the blockbuster transformed Hollywood into a global industry. As you close your eyes, imagine the crowded theaters of the 1970s, lines stretching around the block, fans humming John Williams' scores, and the sense that every film was more than a film, it was an adventure shared with the world. Part 12, The Rise of the Summer Tentpole. Introduction, the age of the blockbuster becomes the age of the tentpole. If Jaws and Star Wars launched the blockbuster era, the 1980s and 1990s cemented the summer tentpole as the foundation of Hollywood's financial model. These weren't just movies, they were anchor events designed to hold up an entire studio's yearly slate of films, much like a tentpole supports the canvas of a circus tent. With massive budgets, aggressive marketing campaigns, and global appeal, these films became cultural touchstones, designed to dominate not only the box office but also toy aisles, fast food tie-ins, and television ads. This chapter explores how Hollywood perfected the summer tentpole strategy, how it changed filmmaking, and how it forever altered audience expectations. From blockbuster to tentpole. The blockbuster proved audiences would turn films into cultural events. The tentpole model refined this idea. High budgets, high stakes, tentpoles were expensive but designed to minimize risk through broad appeal and brand recognition. All-encompassing marketing, no longer just posters and trailers, campaigns spanned TV, radio, toys, video games, and fast food tie-ins. Merchandising revenue, for films like Star Wars and Batman, 1989, merchandise sometimes earned more than the films themselves. Calendar control, summer became the battleground. Studios carefully scheduled releases to dominate weekends and avoid overlap. Studios now plan their entire year around one or two massive releases. The 1980s, tentpoles take over. The 1980s were a laboratory for tentpole filmmaking. Raiders of the Lost Ark, 1981. Spielberg and Lucas created an adventure franchise that defined summer spectacle. E.T., 1982 became a cultural event, its merchandising unprecedented. Batman, 1989. Tim Burton's darker take on the superhero genre, paired with Prince's soundtrack, became one of the first modern marketing juggernauts. Ghostbusters, 1984. Perfect blend of comedy, action, and merchandising potential. The decade proved that tentpoles weren't accidents, they could be engineered. The 1990s, the tentpole machine refined. By the 1990s, tentpoles dominated Hollywood calendars. Jurassic Park, 1993. Spielberg combined cutting-edge CGI and animatronics, creating a worldwide phenomenon. Independence Day, 1996. Roland Emmerich's alien invasion epic capitalized on spectacle and patriotic fervor, promoted months in advance with iconic Super Bowl ads. Titanic, 1997. James Cameron's epic became the highest-grossing film in history at the time, proving tentpoles could be emotional as well as spectacular. Men in Black, 1997 proved sci-fi comedy could be global tentpoles, backed by toys and music tie-ins. The 1990s demonstrated how precision marketing and technological spectacle created unbeatable box office dominance. Key ingredients of the tentpole formula. Tentpoles followed a reliable recipe. Big stars, Will Smith, Tom Cruise, Julia Roberts, bankable names boosted appeal. High concept plots, easy to summarize, instantly engaging. Cutting-edge technology, CGI and special effects showcased must-see visuals. Event marketing, audiences were told these films were too big to miss. Merchandising tie-ins, action figures, soundtracks, fast food promotions extended cultural reach. It wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural event. Risks and rewards. Tentpoles carried both enormous potential and enormous risk. Success stories, a hit could sustain an entire studio for a year or more. Failures, a flop could sink a studio's finances, Waterworld in 1995, Cutthroat Island in 1995. Escalating budgets, as studios competed, budgets soared into the hundreds of millions, raising stakes further. Hollywood was gambling big, but often winning bigger. Audiences and the summer ritual. The tentpole transformed how audiences engaged with cinema. Summer as event season, families and teens flocked to air-conditioned theaters in droves. Repeat viewings, tentpoles encouraged audiences to return multiple times. Shared culture, catchphrases, merchandise, and characters became household staples. The tentpole model ensured that movies weren't just seen, they were lived. The global expansion. Tentpoles were designed for international dominance. Universal appeal. Action, spectacle, and simple themes translated easily across languages. Simultaneous releases, global launch strategies prevented piracy and maximized buzz. Emerging markets, Japan, Europe, and later China became critical to tentpole success. Hollywood became a global empire built on summer spectacles. Closing reflection. The rise of the summer tentpole transformed Hollywood into a calculated, spectacle-driven industry. These weren't just films, they were pillars of culture, holding up studios, shaping summers, and creating shared memories for audiences worldwide. As you close your eyes, picture a crowded theater in the summer of 1993, children clutching dinosaur toys as Jurassic Park roars onto the screen. Or the buzz of July 4, 1996, as audiences cheer alien destruction in Independence Day. This was the tentpole era, an age where movies became more than entertainment, they became cultural landmarks. Part 13, The Independent Film Renaissance, 1990s. Introduction, when the outsiders took the stage. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Hollywood's summer tentpoles and franchise-driven spectacles dominated box offices. But in the shadows of the multiplex, a very different kind of cinema was stirring. Independent filmmakers, working with tiny budgets, unconventional stories, and a burning desire to break rules, began to challenge the mainstream. What followed was the independent film renaissance, a cultural wave that reshaped both the art of cinema and the business of Hollywood. The roots of American independent cinema. Independent filmmaking was not new. Early independence, even during the studio era, outsider productions challenged the system. 1960s and 70s experiments, John Cassavetes' raw, intimate films like Faces, 1968, pioneered indie storytelling. Cult cinema of the 1980s, directors like Jim Jarmusch, Stranger Than Paradise, 1984, and Spike Lee, She's Gotta Have It, 1986. Laid the groundwork for an indie explosion. But it was in the 1990s that indie films found both critical acclaim and commercial success on an unprecedented scale. Sundance and the festival circuit. The Sundance Film Festival became the epicenter of indie discovery. Robert Redford's vision, founded in 1978, Sundance nurtured independent voices outside Hollywood. Breakthrough films, Steven Soderbergh's Sex, Lies, and Videotape, 1989, won Sundance and shocked studios with its box office success. 90s explosion, Sundance launched filmmakers like Quentin Tarantino, Reservoir Dogs, Kevin Smith, Clerks, and the Coen brothers, Fargo. Audience appeal, festivals gave indie films a platform, connecting them directly to audiences hungry for originality. Sundance became not just a festival, it was a movement. Miramax and the indie boom. No company embodied the indie renaissance like Miramax. Aggressive marketing. Run by Harvey and Bob Weinstein, Miramax specialized in turning small films into cultural events. Key hits, Pulp Fiction, 1994, The Crying Game, 1992, and Good Will Hunting, 1997, all blended indie style with mainstream impact. Awards strategy, Miramax perfected Oscar campaigning, elevating indie films into award season contenders. Though controversial in its methods, Miramax brought independent cinema into the heart of Hollywood. The new generation of filmmakers. The 1990s gave rise to a wave of bold new storytellers. Quentin Tarantino exploded with Reservoir Dogs, 1992, and Pulp Fiction, 1994, blending pop culture, violence, and non-linear storytelling. Richard Linklater explored slice-of-life realism in Slacker, 1990, and Dazed and Confused, 1993. Kevin Smith made Clerks, 1994, for $27,000, proving DIY filmmaking could lead to stardom. Paul Thomas Anderson debuted with Hard 8, 1996, and broke through with Boogie Nights, 1997. The Coen brothers perfected quirky indie crime and comedy, from Barton Fink, 1991, to Fargo, 1996. These directors embodied freedom and creativity, inspiring countless others. Indie themes and styles. Independent films differed from Hollywood blockbusters in form and content. Personal stories, intimate explorations of relationships, identity, and everyday struggles. Unconventional structure, non-linear storytelling, ambiguous endings, and experimental pacing. Edgy content, films tackled taboo subjects like sexuality, race, and politics. Low budgets, high creativity, resource limitations forced innovation in storytelling. Indie films gave voice to stories Hollywood ignored. The influence on Hollywood. The indie wave didn't just coexist with Hollywood, it reshaped it. Studios create indie arms, Fox Searchlight, Paramount Classics, and Sony Pictures Classics were formed to chase indie credibility. Hybrid films. Indie sensibilities blended with studio budgets, producing crossover hits like The English Patient, 1996. Talent pipeline. Many directors who began indie became Hollywood's most respected auteurs. The line between independent and mainstream blurred. The global indie spirit. The indie renaissance paralleled global movements. British cinema, directors like Danny Boyle, Trainspotting, 1996, created gritty, energetic indies. Asian cinema, Wong Kar-wai's Chungking Express, 1994, inspired American indies with its lyrical style. Latin American cinema, filmmakers like Alfonso Cuarón and Alejandro González Iñárritu began their journeys that would later bring them to Hollywood. Independent film was not just American, it was global. Legacy of the indie renaissance. The indie boom of the 1990s left a lasting mark. Stars born, actors like Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, Uma Thurman, and Ethan Hawke rose from indie beginnings. Oscar respect. Indie films became award season staples, no longer confined to art houses. Digital democratization. The indie spirit paved the way for digital filmmaking in the 2000s, making movie making accessible to all. Independence became not just a label, but a state of mind. Closing reflection. The independent film renaissance of the 1990s was a rebellion within a rebellion, a reminder that cinema could still surprise, provoke, and inspire. It gave audiences fresh voices, raw honesty, and films that didn't look or sound like anything from the multiplex. As you drift to rest, picture a cramped Sundance screening room in 1994, the nervous energy of a young Tarantino watching audiences react to Pulp Fiction for the first time, or a clerk in a black-and-white convenience store trading banter in Clerks. These weren't just films, they were statements of freedom, proof that anyone with a camera and a vision could change cinema. Part 14, Hollywood and Globalization. Introduction. Hollywood's reach beyond America. By the late 20th century, Hollywood was no longer just America's movie capital, it had become the world's storyteller. Films produced in Los Angeles filled theaters in Paris, Tokyo, Sao Paulo, and Nairobi. The language of Hollywood cinema became a near-universal vocabulary, carried across borders by action spectacles, romantic dramas, and animated fantasies. Yet globalization was a double-edged sword. It elevated Hollywood's influence while also bringing new competition, criticism, and cultural complexities. This chapter explores how Hollywood conquered global markets, how other film industries responded, and how the globalization of cinema reshaped storytelling itself. The expansion of overseas markets. Hollywood's dominance was not accidental, it was carefully cultivated. Distribution networks. By the mid-20th century, American studios had established robust global distribution arms, ensuring their films reached theaters worldwide. World War II aftermath. American films filled voids in European and Asian cinemas devastated by war. Universal appeal. Blockbusters like Star Wars and Jurassic Park thrived abroad because their action and spectacle transcended language barriers. By the 1990s, many Hollywood films earned more abroad than domestically. The language of spectacle. One of Hollywood's greatest strengths was its reliance on spectacle. Action and visual effects, explosions, monsters, and dazzling CGI communicated across languages. Simple narratives, clear plots and archetypal characters appealed universally. Franchise power. Films like Terminator 2, Titanic, and later Avatar became global events. Hollywood learned to speak not just in English, but in the universal grammar of spectacle. Cultural exports and soft power. Hollywood's reach was also a form of cultural diplomacy. American ideals. Films projected values of freedom, individualism, and optimism. Global aspirations. Audiences worldwide often associated Hollywood films with glamour and modernity. Criticism of cultural imperialism. Some nations accused Hollywood of drowning out local voices, promoting American dominance through media. Whether admired or resented, Hollywood's influence was undeniable. The globalization of genres. Hollywood both exported and absorbed influences. Martial arts and Asian cinema. Films like Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon, 1973, and Hong Kong action cinema influenced Hollywood hits like The Matrix, 1999. Bollywood and beyond. India's massive film industry maintained dominance at home but began intersecting with Hollywood in co-productions. Latin American directors, filmmakers like Alfonso Cuarón, Guillermo del Toro, and Alejandro González Iñárritu brought new perspectives to Hollywood, reshaping genres from fantasy to drama. Hollywood's global expansion was not one way, it was a cultural exchange. The role of global box office. By the late 20th and early 21st century, the international box office became essential. Blockbuster economics. Films like Avatar, 2009, earned two-thirds of revenue abroad. China's market. Explosive growth made China the second-largest film market, forcing Hollywood to adapt content to Chinese censors. Global strategies. Simultaneous worldwide releases maximized hype and minimized piracy. The global box office now dictated Hollywood's decisions more than domestic audiences. Hollywood's global challenges. Globalization was not without its hurdles. Censorship. Countries like China, Saudi Arabia, and Russia restricted or edited Hollywood films. Cultural resistance. Nations worried about cultural homogenization, funding domestic industries to counter Hollywood dominance. Piracy. The Internet age made piracy a global issue, undercutting profits. Hollywood had to navigate a complicated international stage. Co-productions and local partnerships. Studios adapted by collaborating internationally. Chinese co-productions. Films like The Great Wall, 2016, blended Hollywood spectacle with Chinese stars and settings. European partnerships. Hollywood tapped into government subsidies and locations across Europe. Local talent. Casting international stars like Jackie Chan, Penelope Cruz, and Lupita Nyong'o broadened appeal. Globalization reshaped casting, financing, and storytelling. Closing reflection. Globalization turned Hollywood into the planet's premier cultural export, but it also challenged the industry to evolve. No longer could Hollywood focus only on American audiences, its films had to appeal to billions. This brought immense profits but also forced compromises, cultural negotiations, and new ways of telling stories. As you drift to sleep, picture theaters from Mexico City to Mumbai, Paris to Beijing, all glowing with the same images of dinosaurs, superheroes, or star-crossed lovers. Hollywood had become global. Not just a place, but a language spoken across the world. Part 15. Technology transforms Hollywood. Introduction. From film reels to digital dreams. From its earliest days, Hollywood has been shaped by technology, whether it was the arrival of synchronized sound in the 1920s or the widescreen innovations of the 1950s. But the late 20th and early 21st centuries brought a technological revolution unlike any before. Advances in computer-generated imagery, CGI, digital filmmaking, and sound design reshaped how films were made, marketed, and experienced. This chapter explores how technology transformed Hollywood from the age of celluloid reels to the era of digital epics like Jurassic Park and Avatar. The special effects revolution of the 1970s and 80s. Before CGI, practical effects dominated. Star Wars, 1977. George Lucas's team at Industrial Light and Magic, ILM, pioneered motion control photography, creating realistic space battles. Practical effects, films like The Thing, 1982, and Alien, 1979, relied on puppetry, animatronics, and miniatures. Sound innovations, Dolby Stereo made films more immersive, introducing audiences to surround sound experiences. The groundwork for the digital era was already being laid. The arrival of CGI. The 1990s ushered in the age of CGI. Early experiments, Tron, 1982, and The Last Starfighter, 1984, dabbled in computer graphics but were limited by technology. Terminator 2, Judgment Day, 1991. James Cameron stunned audiences with the liquid metal T-1000, a milestone in CGI. Jurassic Park, 1993. Spielberg and ILM blended animatronics with CGI dinosaurs, creating jaw-dropping realism. Audiences had never seen anything like it. The digital frontier had arrived. Digital filmmaking and editing. Beyond effects, technology changed the filmmaking process itself. Nonlinear editing, systems like Avid replaced splicing film reels, allowing instant revisions. Digital cameras, by the 2000s, filmmakers like George Lucas, Star Wars. Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, 2002, embraced all-digital production. Cost efficiency, digital reduced expenses for film stock and processing, while enabling new styles of shooting. Filmmaking became more flexible, fast, and experimental. Sound and immersion. Advancements in sound transformed the cinematic experience. THX certification, 1983. George Lucas developed standards for theater sound, ensuring consistent quality. Dolby Digital and DTS, 1990s. Multi-channel surround sound became standard, making theaters more immersive. IMAX soundscapes, larger-than-life sound systems turned films into visceral experiences. Audiences didn't just watch films, they felt them. Animation in the digital age. Technology also reshaped animation. Toy Story, 1995. Pixar's fully computer-animated film proved digital animation could tell emotional, box-office-dominating stories. DreamWorks and Disney competed with CGI spectacles like Shrek, 2001, and Frozen, 2013. Hybrid techniques. Films blended live action and CGI seamlessly, from The Matrix, 1999, to The Lion King, 2019 remake. Digital animation became central to Hollywood's tentpole economy. The 3D and IMAX craze. Hollywood embraced new formats to expand spectacle. 3D revival. James Cameron's Avatar, 2009, showcased advanced 3D, breaking box office records. IMAX expansion. Blockbusters like The Dark Knight, 2008, used IMAX cameras to enhance scale and spectacle. Event viewing. These technologies turned films into must-see theatrical experiences. Technology became a tool to lure audiences away from home screens. Technology meets marketing. Advances weren't just on screen, they shaped how films were sold. Digital trailers. The internet allowed global distribution of trailers, reaching millions instantly. Online campaigns. Viral marketing, like the Blair Witch Project in 1999, demonstrated the power of digital buzz. Social media. By the 2010s, platforms like Twitter and Instagram made stars more accessible and films more interactive. Technology blurred the line between film and audience. Challenges of the digital age. With innovation came complications. Rising costs. Advanced CGI and IMAX raised budgets to astronomical levels. Overuse of CGI. Critics complained of soulless visuals lacking authenticity. Piracy. Digital distribution made films easier to copy and share illegally. Theatrical versus streaming. Technology enabled new platforms that threatened traditional theaters. The revolution came with risks as well as rewards. Closing reflection. Technology has always been Hollywood's partner, but in the past 40 years, it has transformed the industry beyond recognition. From the dinosaurs of Jurassic Park to the world of Pandora in Avatar, from Pixar's emotional CGI to IMAX's overwhelming spectacle, technology redefined what movies could be. As you drift to rest, imagine the shimmer of a digital projector, the roar of Dolby surround sound, and the lifelike gaze of a computer-generated character on screen. This was Hollywood's technological transformation, not just innovation, but the reinvention of wonder itself. Part 16, The Streaming Revolution. Introduction. When the theater moved into the living room. For over a century, going to the movies meant stepping into a theater, velvet curtains, popcorn in hand, and a darkened room filled with strangers. But in the 21st century, technology and consumer habits converged to bring the theater experience into the home. What began with Netflix mailing DVDs transformed into the streaming revolution, a seismic shift that disrupted Hollywood's economics, rewrote distribution models, and forever altered how audiences engage with film. This chapter explores how streaming rose to dominance, how traditional studios adapted, or resisted, and what it means for the future of Hollywood. Netflix and the DVD years. Before streaming, Netflix was a humble DVD rental service. Founded in 1997, Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph launched Netflix as a mail-order DVD company, offering no late fees, a contrast to Blockbuster. Subscription model. By 1999, Netflix introduced monthly subscriptions, pioneering the binge consumption model before streaming even existed. Data-driven curation. Netflix tracked user preferences, foreshadowing its algorithm-driven future. By the mid-2000s, Netflix had become a household name, but its greatest disruption was yet to come. Streaming takes center stage. In 2007, Netflix launched its streaming service. Instant access. Subscribers could watch films and shows instantly online, bypassing physical media. Licensing deals. Early partnerships with studios provided a vast library of films and TV shows. The death of Blockbuster. By the early 2010s, Netflix had effectively replaced video rental stores. The shift from ownership to access, the idea of watching anything, anytime, changed audience expectations permanently. The rise of original content. By the early 2010s, Netflix made another bold leap, producing its own content. House of Cards, 2013. The political drama became Netflix's first major original hit, proving streaming platforms could rival traditional TV. Binge-watching. Netflix dropped full seasons at once, changing viewing habits and creating cultural moments. Global reach. Netflix invested in international originals, from Spanish thriller Money Heist to Korean sensation Squid Game. Hollywood studios now had a new competitor, one that was both distributor and producer. Competitors enter the arena. Netflix's success sparked an explosion of rivals. Amazon Prime Video leveraged Amazon's vast resources, producing hits like The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Hulu positioned itself as a hub for next-day TV streaming and originals. Disney Plus launched in 2019, pulling Disney, Marvel, Pixar, and Star Wars content from Netflix to build its own powerhouse. HBO Max, Apple TV+, Peacock, Paramount+, each studio and tech giant scrambled to enter the streaming war. The once unified Hollywood marketplace fractured into subscription battles. Impact on theaters. Streaming transformed not just homes, but theaters themselves. Shrinking theatrical windows. Traditionally, films played exclusively in theaters for months before home release. Streaming shortened, or eliminated, this window. COVID-19 acceleration. The pandemic forced theaters to close, pushing studios to release films directly to streaming. Warner Bros. Even debuted its entire 2021 slate on HBO Max the same day as theaters. Hybrid future. While blockbusters like Top Gun, Maverick proved theaters still matter, streaming is now integral to release strategies. The traditional, theater-first, model is gone. Data and algorithms, the new gatekeepers. Streaming platforms don't just distribute, they shape what gets made. Algorithm-driven decisions. Data on viewing habits influences greenlighting decisions. Personalized recommendations. Each user sees a tailored version of the platform. Risk and reward. Data allows platforms to target niche audiences while still pursuing global hits. The algorithm replaced studio executives as Hollywood's most powerful tastemaker. The global expansion of streaming. Streaming also accelerated globalization. Worldwide reach. Platforms like Netflix launched simultaneously in 190+ countries. Local originals, Korean dramas, Spanish thrillers, and Indian romances found global audiences. Cross-cultural hits, shows like Squid Game and films like RRR demonstrated non-English content could dominate worldwide. Streaming made cinema more global than ever before. Challenges of the streaming age. Yet streaming is not without its tensions. Content glut. With every platform producing originals, audiences face choice fatigue. Rising costs, licensing wars and original production budgets have ballooned. Sustainability. Many platforms struggle to turn profits, leading to cancellations and mergers. Theatrical identity. Questions remain over whether movies are diminished when released directly to home screens. The revolution is still unfolding, with no clear endpoint in sight. Closing reflection. The streaming revolution is Hollywood's greatest transformation since the arrival of sound. It shifted power from studios to platforms, from theaters to living rooms, and from executives to algorithms. It gave audiences unprecedented choice while challenging the very idea of what a movie or TV show means. As you close your eyes, picture a quiet evening at home, no lines, no tickets, just the glow of a screen and an endless library of stories at your fingertips. This is the streaming era, personal, boundless, and constantly evolving. Part 17, Diversity and Representation. Introduction: who gets to tell the story? From its very beginnings, Hollywood has been both a mirror and a maker of cultural identity. It shaped global images of romance, heroism, and adventure. But it also reflected the biases of the society that created it. For decades, diversity and representation in Hollywood lagged behind reality, with women, people of color, LGBTQ+ communities, and people with disabilities often excluded or misrepresented on screen. Yet the struggle for visibility, fairness, and authentic storytelling has been one of the most important ongoing battles in Hollywood history. This chapter traces the long arc of inclusion, from early stereotypes to breakthroughs, from systemic exclusion to movements demanding authentic representation, and how Hollywood continues to wrestle with diversity today. Early Hollywood, stereotypes and exclusion. Hollywood's early decades were filled with caricatures and exclusion. Black representation. African Americans were often limited to servant roles, comic relief, or demeaning stereotypes. The Birth of a Nation, 1915, infamously glorified the Ku Klux Klan while portraying black characters as dangerous or subhuman. Yellowface and Asian representation. White actors like Mickey Rooney played Asian roles in grotesque caricature, while Asian actors were denied leading parts. Latino characters, often depicted as bandits, temptresses, or comic foils, rather than full human characters. Native Americans, frequently presented as villains in westerns, stripped of cultural nuance. Women, despite iconic stars like Greta Garbo and Katharine Hepburn, roles were limited to love interests, damsels in distress, or femme fatale. Representation was defined not by inclusion, but by stereotype and erasure. The Hays Code and its consequences. From 1934 to the late 1960s, the Hays Code censored Hollywood. Race, interracial romance was forbidden, eliminating stories of cross-cultural relationships. Gender roles, women were expected to uphold morality, limiting portrayals of sexuality or independence. LGBTQ+ characters, homosexuality was banned outright, leading to coded portrayals of villains or comic stereotypes. The code reinforced exclusion, shaping decades of limited representation. Cracks in the system, 1940s, 1960s. Slowly, breakthroughs began to appear. Hattie McDaniel, first black actor to win an Oscar, Gone with the Wind, 1939, though she was barred from sitting with white cast members at the ceremony. Dorothy Dandridge broke barriers as the first black woman nominated for Best Actress, Carmen Jones, 1954. Sidney Poitier rose as Hollywood's first black leading man in films like Lilies of the Field, 1963, challenging racial stereotypes. International stars, actors like Sophia Loren, Italy, and Toshiro Mifune, Japan, via Kurosawa films, began to penetrate Hollywood consciousness. The cracks were small, but the door to greater representation was opening. The Civil Rights Era and Changing Hollywood. By the 1960s and 70s, Hollywood responded, slowly, to America's cultural upheavals. Blaxploitation films, movies like Shaft, 1971, and Superfly, 1972, put black heroes on screen, though often within stereotypes of violence or sexuality. Native American representation, revisionist westerns like Little Big Men, 1970, and Dances with Wolves, 1990, attempted more sympathetic portrayals. Latino stories, still rare, but filmmakers like Luis Valdez, Zoot Suit, 1981, brought Chicano experiences to cinema. Women's roles, feminist movements influenced films with stronger, more complex female characters. Representation was still imperfect, but new narratives began to emerge. LGBTQ+ representation and the post-code era. When the Hays Code ended in the late 1960s, new possibilities opened. The Boys in the Band, 1970, one of the first films to center openly gay characters. Still marginalized, for decades, LGBTQ+ characters were often villains. Basic Instinct, 1992, or Tragic Figures, Philadelphia, 1993. Independent cinema, indie filmmakers led the way, telling queer stories Hollywood avoided. The road to authentic LGBTQ+ representation was long and uneven. The push for diversity in the modern era. The late 20th and early 21st centuries brought stronger calls for inclusion. Spike Lee, films like Do the Right Thing, 1989, and Malcolm X, 1992, challenged racial injustice head-on. Latino representation, directors like Robert Rodriguez, El Mariachi, and actors like Salma Hayek began breaking barriers. Asian American stories, films like The Joy Luck Club, 1993, showcased nuanced Asian family life. Women directors, Kathryn Bigelow became the first woman to win the Best Director Oscar, The Hurt Locker, 2009. Hollywood was slowly acknowledging diversity as essential. Movements that changed the conversation. Activism reshaped Hollywood in the 2010s. #OscarsSoWhite, 2015 social media backlash against all-white Oscar nominees forced the Academy to diversify membership. #MeToo, 2017 exposed systemic abuse of women, leading to calls for safer and more equitable workplaces. Global success of diverse films, Black Panther, 2018, Crazy Rich Asians, 2018, and Parasite, 2019, proved diverse stories could succeed globally. Representation was no longer a side issue, it became central to Hollywood's future. Hollywood today, progress and challenges. Today, Hollywood is more diverse than ever, but challenges remain. Streaming platforms, Netflix and others have amplified global voices, producing hits from Nigeria, India, Korea, and beyond. Inclusive casting, efforts to diversify roles and opportunities have grown, though debates over tokenism persist. Behind the camera, progress is slower in directing, producing, and executive roles, where gatekeepers remain disproportionately white and male. Backlash, some audiences and commentators resist diverse casting, proving representation remains a contested space. The struggle is ongoing, but the trajectory bends toward inclusion. Closing reflection. Hollywood's journey with diversity and representation is a story of exclusion, struggle, and gradual progress. It is the story of voices long silenced demanding to be heard, of images once distorted being reclaimed, and of an industry still learning to reflect the richness of the world it serves. As you close your eyes, picture the bright lights of the Oscars stage, where in 2019 Bong Joon-ho's Parasite made history as the first non-English film to win Best Picture. That moment, like many others before it, was not just about cinema, it was about recognition, representation, and the universal power of storytelling. Part 18, Hollywood's Dark Side. Introduction, The Shadows Beneath the Spotlight. Hollywood is often described as the dream factory, a place where imagination becomes reality and stars shine brighter than anywhere else. But behind the glittering lights and red carpets lies a darker history. A story of scandals, abuses of power, cover-ups, and reckonings that have haunted the industry since its inception. For every dazzling premiere, there have been whispers of corruption, exploitation, and tragedy. This chapter pulls back the curtain on Hollywood's hidden side, tracing its scandals from the golden age through the #MeToo movement of the 21st century. The silent era, early scandals. Even in its infancy, Hollywood had a reputation for excess. Fatty Arbuckle Scandal, 1921. Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, a beloved silent comedian, was accused of manslaughter in the death of actress Virginia Rappe. Though acquitted, his career was destroyed. Drug abuse, silent stars like Wallace Reed fell victim to addiction, exposing the darker side of studio pressure. Studio cover UPS, to protect profits, studios often hushed up scandals, shielding stars while silencing victims. The myth of Hollywood innocence was already cracking. The studio system and exploitation. The golden age was glamorous, but also exploitative. The casting couch, the phrase became shorthand for sexual exploitation, with studio executives using power to demand favors from aspiring actresses. Star control. Studios micromanaged stars' personal lives, dictating marriages, covering up affairs, and forcing abortions to preserve reputations. MGM and Judy Garland, pressured to work grueling hours and take drugs to stay thin and energetic, Garland's struggles became emblematic of systemic abuse. Hollywood's glitz concealed a machinery of control. Organized crime and corruption. During the mid-20th century, Hollywood also intersected with darker forces. Mob influence. Organized crime laundered money through theaters and had ties to unions and nightclubs frequented by stars. Union battles. Labor disputes sometimes turned violent, with mob-backed interests shaping outcomes. Censorship and morality. Corruption extended to the Hays office, where backroom deals determined what audiences could and could not see. The Dream Factory was never free of shadows. Tragedies of fame. Hollywood also exposed stars to crushing pressures. Marilyn Monroe, symbol of glamour, but her struggles with exploitation, mental health, and her mysterious death revealed the darker side of fame. James Dean and River Phoenix, both young actors whose untimely deaths embodied the dangers of Hollywood excess. Child stars, many, from Shirley Temple to the cast of Diff'rent Strokes, experienced exploitation, financial abuse, or personal struggles. Fame often came with a devastating cost. The 1970s, 1990s, power, abuse, and cover UPS. As the studio system faded, abuses of power did not disappear. Roman Polanski case, 1977. The acclaimed director fled the U.S. after being charged with statutory rape of a 13-year-old. He continued to work abroad, highlighting Hollywood's willingness to separate art from crime. O.J. Simpson trial, 1995. A media spectacle blending Hollywood celebrity, crime, and racial politics, exposing America's fascination with scandal. Harvey Weinstein rumors. Even before the 2010s, whispers about Weinstein's predatory behavior circulated, though he remained shielded by power. Hollywood's ability to protect its powerful abusers remained intact. Substance abuse and the price of stardom. The pressures of fame continued to destroy lives. Drug culture. From the cocaine-fueled 1980s to opioid crises, substance abuse claimed stars like John Belushi, Heath Ledger, and Whitney Houston. Pressure on women, unrealistic beauty standards and intense scrutiny led many actresses into eating disorders, addiction, or mental health crises. Isolation of fame. The very spotlight that elevated stars often left them vulnerable and alone. Behind Hollywood's glamour was a cycle of destruction. The #MeToo era and reckoning. The most significant modern reckoning came in 2017 with the #MeToo movement. Harvey Weinstein exposed. Investigations revealed decades of abuse, leading to his conviction and imprisonment. Industry-wide impact. Dozens of powerful men, from producers to actors, faced allegations. Voices amplified. Women across the industry, and across society, spoke out, demanding accountability. Time's Up movement. Initiative sought structural change in Hollywood, from harassment protections to equity in leadership roles. The industry could no longer ignore what had been whispered for generations. Beyond #MeToo, systemic issues. While progress has been made, Hollywood continues to wrestle with deep-rooted problems. Pay disparities. Women and actors of color are still often paid less than white male counterparts. Representation in leadership. Studio boards and directing chairs remain disproportionately white and male. Ongoing harassment. The culture of silence has weakened but not disappeared. The struggle for accountability continues. Closing reflection. Hollywood's dark side is not a separate story, it is woven into the very fabric of its history. The same industry that created timeless art has also enabled exploitation, abuse, and tragedy. Yet by confronting these shadows, Hollywood has the opportunity to reshape itself into something more just, inclusive, and humane. As you close your eyes, imagine the shimmer of the red carpet, the flash of cameras, the roar of applause, and remember the stories hidden in the shadows behind those lights. Hollywood's history is not just one of dreams, but of struggles for truth, dignity, and justice. Part 19: Hollywood and Politics. Introduction: The screen as a political stage. From its earliest days, Hollywood has never been just about entertainment. Movies tell stories, and stories carry values, beliefs, and visions of society. Whether through subtle messages woven into comedies or bold propaganda during wartime, Hollywood has been deeply entwined with politics. It has served as a battleground for cultural debates, a tool of persuasion, and at times, an outright weapon in America's domestic and international struggles. This chapter explores the long and complicated relationship between Hollywood and politics, from patriotic musicals and Cold War paranoia to protest films and today's polarized climate. The early years: morality and control. Even in the silent era, politics shaped Hollywood. Censorship and decency: local and state governments pushed for censorship of films deemed immoral. Hays Code, 1934 to 1968. Born from political and religious pressure, the code restricted depictions of sexuality, violence, and un-American behavior. Patriotism: early Hollywood often depicted America as a land of opportunity, reinforcing national myths. The political hand was visible, even if disguised as morality. World War II: Hollywood goes to war. During World War II, Hollywood became a direct political instrument. Propaganda films: Capra's Why We Fight series explained America's role in the war. Patriotic stories: films like Casablanca, 1942, rallied audiences around the fight against fascism. Stars for soldiers: celebrities like Bob Hope entertained troops abroad, while stars promoted war bonds at home. The film industry became part of America's arsenal of democracy. The Blacklist and the Cold War. The Cold War saw one of Hollywood's darkest political chapters. WAC hearings, 1947, 1950s writers and directors were interrogated about communist ties. The Hollywood 10 refused to cooperate, went to prison, and were blacklisted. Propaganda films: some Cold War films like I Married a Communist, 1949, or Red Dawn, 1984, dramatized fears of infiltration. Politics wasn't just in the films, it dictated who could and could not work in Hollywood. The 1960s, 1970s, counterculture cinema. As America's political climate shifted, so did Hollywood. Anti-war films: Coming Home, 1978, and Apocalypse Now, 1979, grappled with Vietnam. Civil rights influence: Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, 1967, reflected changing attitudes toward race and interracial marriage. Watergate and distrust: thrillers like All the President's Men, 1976, captured the era's skepticism toward government. Hollywood became a mirror for protest, dissent, and political disillusionment. Reagan, conservatism, and the 1980s. The 1980s marked a return to patriotic narratives. Reagan as symbol: a former Hollywood actor himself, Ronald Reagan embodied the marriage of Hollywood and politics. Action heroes as politics: films like Rambo, First Blood Part 2, 1985, and Top Gun, 1986, projected American military might. Hollywood conservatism: while often liberal-leaning, Hollywood also nurtured conservative icons, shaping debates over family values and freedom. The blockbuster era reinforced patriotism, even as indie films kept pushing boundaries. Hollywood and political activism. Actors and filmmakers often used fame to speak out. Civil rights support: Marlon Brando and Jane Fonda were outspoken activists. Anti-war activism: Fonda's Vietnam War protests made her a lightning rod of controversy. Charity and awareness: stars leveraged their fame for political causes, from famine relief concerts to climate change awareness. Hollywood became a megaphone for activism, sometimes embraced, sometimes attacked. 21st century: polarization and power. In recent decades, Hollywood's political role has intensified. War on Terror films: Zero Dark 30, 2012, and American Sniper, 2014. Explored post-9/11 conflicts, sparking debates over patriotism versus propaganda. Liberal reputation. Hollywood's largely progressive culture made it a target of conservative criticism. Oscars and politics. Award shows became stages for political speeches on gender, race, immigration, and more. Polarized audiences. Some Americans embraced Hollywood's activism, while others turned away, accusing it of elitism or bias. The screen remained a battlefield of cultural identity. Global politics and Hollywood's reach. Hollywood's political role extends beyond America. Soft power. Films projected American values worldwide, shaping perceptions of the U.S. China's influence. As China became a dominant market, studios altered content to appease censors, removing flags, changing dialogue, or excluding sensitive topics. International resistance. Some countries restricted Hollywood films to protect local culture, framing them as tools of American dominance. Politics and profit collided in global negotiations. Closing reflection. Hollywood has always been political, sometimes overtly, sometimes subtly. It has been a tool of governments, a platform for dissent, and a mirror of America's deepest divides. Whether through patriotic blockbusters or socially conscious dramas, its stories shape the way people see the world and themselves. As you close your eyes, imagine the flicker of a screen showing Casablanca in 1942, Apocalypse Now in 1979, or Black Panther in 2018. Each film was more than a story, it was a political statement, shaped by its time, and shaping the times in return. Part 20, The Future of Hollywood. Introduction, A New Era at the Crossroads. Hollywood has always been about transformation. From the silent era to sound, from studio dominance to streaming disruption, the industry has reinvented itself time and again. Today, it stands at another crossroads. Artificial intelligence, globalization, diversity movements, and new technologies are reshaping how films are made, distributed, and experienced. The question is no longer whether Hollywood will change, but how, and in what direction. This final chapter explores Hollywood's uncertain future, the challenges it faces, and the possibilities that lie ahead. Streaming and the shifting marketplace. The streaming revolution has already rewritten the rules. Multiple platforms competing, Netflix, Disney+, Amazon, Apple, Hulu, and others battle for dominance, fragmenting the marketplace. Theatrical survival, blockbusters like Top Gun, Maverick, 2022, and Barbie, 2023, prove theaters still matter, but mostly for large-scale cultural events. Hybrid models, many films now release simultaneously in theaters and on streaming, a shift accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Audience behavior, viewers are accustomed to choice, convenience, and binge-watching, demanding constant new content. Hollywood's future is inseparable from streaming economics. Artificial intelligence and technology. AI promises both innovation and disruption. AI in production, tools already help with scriptwriting, visual effects, and even de-aging actors on screen. Virtual production, LED walls, pioneered in The Mandalorian, allow filmmakers to create realistic environments without travel. Risks and debates, the Writers Guild strike of 2023 revealed deep concerns over AI replacing human creativity. Who owns an AI-generated script? Who controls a digital likeness of an actor? The promise, if used ethically, technology could expand storytelling possibilities while preserving human artistry. Hollywood must balance efficiency with the soul of creativity. Global cinema and competition. Hollywood no longer monopolizes global storytelling. Korean Wave, Hallyu films like Parasite, 2019, and shows like Squid Game, 2021, proved global hits need not be American. Bollywood and Nollywood. India and Nigeria's industries produce vast amounts of content, reaching enormous audiences. Chinese market, once a golden prize for Hollywood, China now limits foreign films, boosting its domestic industry. Cross-pollination, co-productions and international casts are increasingly standard. The global Hollywood of the future may be decentralized, with multiple centers of power. Representation and responsibility. Diversity is no longer optional, it is central to Hollywood's relevance. Inclusive storytelling, films like Black Panther and Everything Everywhere All at Once proved diversity is commercially powerful. Behind the camera, calls continue for greater inclusion of women, people of color, and LGBTQ+ creators in writing, directing, and executive roles. Backlash and culture wars. Representation also sparks resistance, showing Hollywood remains a flashpoint in cultural debates. The future of Hollywood will depend on whether it reflects its global, diverse audience authentically. The business of franchises. Franchise filmmaking remains Hollywood's financial backbone. Marvel Cinematic Universe, the most profitable franchise in history, redefined interconnected storytelling. DC and Star Wars. Other studios rely heavily on existing brands to anchor their slates. Franchise fatigue. Audiences are beginning to show signs of burnout, pushing studios to consider new stories or risk decline. The question is whether Hollywood can balance franchises with originality, audiences and interactivity. The future may blur the line between watching and participating. Gaming and film merge. Video games like The Last of Us, adapted into a hit HBO show, prove crossover appeal. Virtual reality, VR immersive storytelling experiments offer new experiences, though mainstream adoption lags. Interactive films, Netflix tested formats like Bandersnatch, hinting at more participatory futures. The next generation may not just watch stories, they may live inside them. Hollywood's eternal resilience. Despite predictions of its demise at every stage, Hollywood has always adapted. From silent films to sound, it thrived. From television to home video, it survived. From piracy to streaming, it reinvented itself. From COVID to AI, it will likely do the same. Hollywood's essence is reinvention. Closing reflection, the eternal screen. The history of Hollywood is not just a history of movies, it is a history of how humanity tells stories. From black and white silence to 3D blockbusters, from studio moguls to streaming algorithms, Hollywood has always been a place where technology, commerce, and imagination collide. As you drift into sleep, imagine the glow of a future theater, perhaps not even a theater at all, but a headset, a hologram, or a story whispered by an AI. Imagine audiences still gathering, in whatever form, to laugh, cry, cheer, and dream together. That is Hollywood's true legacy. Not the studios, not the technologies, but the eternal power of story.